I want to begin this video by confessing my love for the original Sega Rally Championship. It was first released in the arcade in 1995 and was developed by Sega AM3 for the Model 2 hardware. It introduced a gameplay that was far more realistic than anything we'd seen before. The physics engine was built to allow the varied terrain to affect your driving literally at every turn. Each bump and groove in the track could change your speed and trajectory, creating a sense of chaos we simply never had seen before in a racing game. Trying to harness and control that chaos is what the fun of Sega Rally was all about. You were constantly slipping and sliding around every corner, and you had just enough control to see it through. Amazingly, only 10 months later, Sega CS and Sega AM3 worked together to get the Sega Saturn version out. It was an unbelievably faithful port given the differences in power between the two platforms, and one of the games that finally showed what the Saturn could do when programmed properly. While it did need to be scaled down visually, that incredible gameplay was still intact and as fun as ever. Sega recognized the power of these releases and decided to give us a sequel on their brand new Model 3 arcade board in 1998. It added more cars, more tracks, and refined that gameplay we had all come to know and love. It had a huge boost in visuals as well, now featuring more realistic lighting and texturing. When Sega launched the Dreamcast in 1998, one of the earliest games you heard about was a port of Sega Rally 2, and it was exciting as hell to consider the possibilities. On paper, the Dreamcast was more than powerful enough to do it perfectly, yet what we got was far from it. Many gamers came away disappointed, and in this episode we will be taking a look at Sega Rally 2 for the Dreamcast. We know it wasn't arcade perfect, but does that mean it wasn't a good game? Let's find out. Like the first Sega Rally, this one sorta does its own thing. It doesn't adhere to any real rally racing rules at all. Your goal is to finish first in each race against pace-setting AI that offers no real challenge other than simply existing on the track and getting in the way. Your real enemy is the clock, and on the harder settings, it can be ruthless in its tyranny. The home version here gets a lot of additional content over the arcade original. You can open up a bunch of extra cars, and there are 2 new environments complete with 3 variations per. Combined with the new variations to the existing arcade tracks, you have far more content than the original Sega Rally. Also new to the home release is the 10-year championship. This mode gives you certain tracks to beat in what amounts to seasons. If you can defeat the season in first place, you open up a new car. Rounding out the modes is a time attack where you battle against your best times, as well as a 2-player split screen mode for couch co-op with you and your friends. Most of these modes allow you to tune your cars. You have control over things like suspension, steering, braking, and tires, all of which can have profound effects on the performance of the vehicle. The reason this is important is because Sega Rally 2 takes the type of surface you are racing on very seriously. Tarmac, gravel, snow, mud, it all has its own effect on your traction and your ability to navigate with success. This all of course ties directly into the gameplay, and like Sega Rally before it, it's just incredibly fun. You'll feel every bump and elevation change thanks to the fantastic physics engine in place. Some tracks have mud puddles that slow you down, some have ruts that throw off your steering, and some have jumps that can launch you at an odd angle and ruin everything. When it's all tied together, you get one great playing game that, despite being 20 plus years old, still holds up to much of the stuff today. The one area where Sega Rally 2 falters is in its visual presentation. The arcade version was a silky smooth 60 frames per second, with detailed textures, great special effects, and a draw distance that you never really noticed. The Dreamcast version was developed by Sega Software R&D Department 6, which would become Smilebit shortly thereafter. It was worked on in tandem with the Dreamcast hardware development and uses Windows CE, both of which contributing to its poor showing. Being so early in the life of the system meant it didn't use the Dreamcast hardware to its full potential, and using Windows CE meant that the software was not tailored to the strengths of the chipset. And when you compare it to the arcade, it's ever so apparent in its failure. Even using the code to improve the performance, the Dreamcast version is still not a solid 60 frames per second, and worse, you lose most of the trackside detail that made the engine stand out in the first place. This all came as a shock because the Dreamcast was supposed to be a powerhouse capable of doing Model 3 translations, yet here was the proof that it absolutely was not up to the task, at least upon first inspection. The truth is that the Model 3 and the Dreamcast were very different technology that did not easily translate. Sega Rally 2 was tailor-made for the Model 3, and using third-party tools to port it to the Dreamcast meant it never stood a chance at replicating it 100%. The question is, despite its inferiority to the Model 3 version, is it a bad-looking game? The answer is absolutely not. Originally hitting Japan in January of 1999, it was one of the best-looking console games you could buy. It was light years beyond anything on the Saturn, PlayStation, or Nintendo 64, and it still looked better than many of the arcade games at the time. I mean, I can still sit back and watch its replay feature and love what I see. And that really is how I look at this game. There are two sides to the story. Yes, it was a big letdown visually from the arcade, particularly its performance, but when it came to home games, it was still one of the better looking titles that year. I would imagine many of you fall to one side of this view and stay there. If you were looking for an authentic arcade experience, you didn't get it. But if you took it on its own merits, you probably came away loving it. It can be argued that the sound and music in Sega's games are as important as its visuals. In the original Sega Rally, you got some pretty nifty tunes that really set the mood and atmosphere for each race. Hell, sitting here speaking into this mic right now, I can still hear the Sega Rally race music in the back of my mind. Sega Rally 2 has some of that magic as well, but overall it's slightly less memorable. This may be because the Saturn version of the original Sega Rally featured a reworked soundtrack in Red Book audio that was just killer, so keep that in mind. Still, what's here sounds great, so let's have a listen to a few selections. So now that we've gone over gameplay, graphics, and sound, what's the overall verdict? The fact that this runs not so smoothly definitely has an effect on the gameplay, but that's not a fatal flaw that ruins it. Like Daytona USA on the Saturn, you will definitely feel that frame rate difference, but it remains quite enjoyable regardless. As I mentioned before, there is actually a code that allows you to turn off trackside detail for a smoother experience, so if performance is paramount to you, you do have options. Combine this general fun factor with the additional cars, tracks, and modes of the Dreamcast version, and it's easy to see why people still love it. For me, I'm kinda in between the 2 points of view. I lament the fact that this was not arcade perfect, while looking to its positives as a home game. I love the extras, and back in 1999, it was still one of the prettiest home racers available. There's no question though that Sega shat the bed on this, however. I mean, what should have been an absolute showpiece for the Dreamcast ended up disappointing arcade fans fiercely. You can love it and play up its positives all day long, but you still have to recognize the fact that it has its shortcomings. If you ever get a chance to play a Sega Rally 2 arcade machine, please do so without hesitation. It's a powerful piece of Sega's history that looks and plays right up there with some of their best work. The home port has its problems we discussed, and is less impressive overall, yet can still be a good time. If you are a stickler for perfection or performance, you'll want to skip it, however. If you have the patience to get old PC games working, there is a Windows 98 version that runs at 60 frames per second, though getting it up and running on a modern machine is more effort than it's worth. And that pretty much covers all your options for Sega Rally 2. It's never been reissued for anything, so if you want to play it easily, the Dreamcast is pretty much your only option. And that is perhaps the most frustrating thing about it. Sega would have a killer series on their hands if they brought back Sega Rally 1 and 2 in a collector set for modern machines. I can't imagine it would be difficult to get the licenses for these old cars, and the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X surely have the power to give them both the 4K treatment. Until Sega decides to do that, we have to deal with our limited options, and the Dreamcast version has its own merits that very much makes it worth looking into. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.